Nobody in Miami believes in the devil. This is not because Miami is a rational city. Miami believes in all kinds of things. Crypto that will definitely come back. Wellness injections mixed in hotel bathrooms. Members-only restaurants where the members are mostly landlords with veneers. And networking events where men in linen shirts say, "We're still pre-revenue," with the gravity of monks describing the silence of God. But the devil? No, too old-fashioned, too Catholic, too honest. In Miami, evil wears white sneakers and says it is building in the consciousness space. Which is how I found myself in Coconut Grove at midnight, standing on the roof deck of a house that had once belonged to a Colombian shipping family, listening to Dr. Raymond explain that he had solved the oldest problem in human history. He had a glass of mineral water in one hand. Nobody in Miami drinks tap water because tap water is for people without pitch decks. I asked him if it was safe. He told me safe was a word for dentists and compliance departments. I told him that didn't answer my question. He said it answered the spirit of it. The house looked out across the black water of Biscayne Bay. Downtown glowed in the distance like an overheating graphics card. Planes moved above us, going somewhere better, or pretending to. Below, in the garden, palms shifted in a warm wind that smelled faintly of salt, jasmine, chlorine, and money. Raymond was not technically a doctor anymore. He had been a neurosurgeon once, briefly brilliant, and then professionally inconvenient. After an ethics board incident, 2 civil suits, and 1 extremely bad podcast interview, he had become something much more dangerous. A founder. His company was called PAN. The deck said it stood for Perceptual Augmentation Network, but everyone knew the acronym had come first. The logo was a tasteful little goat horn wrapped around an infinity symbol. The website promised direct interface with the real beneath the real, which investors loved because it meant absolutely nothing and could therefore be valued at anything. I asked him what PAN did. He said it removed the filter. I asked which filter. He said the human one. I should have left it there. I should have said, "That sounds illegal," and gone home to my apartment, where my greatest danger was ordering delivery from a place called Ghost Bowl. But curiosity is a parasite with good manners. It waits until you invite it in. So there I was, on Raymond's roof, being told that humanity had spent its entire existence looking at shadows. He said, "You see the bay, the buildings, the little boats, and you think, this is the world. But it isn't. It's a user interface, a child-safe dashboard, reality as rendered for the soft mammalian idiot." I told him I assumed he meant me in that scenario. He said he meant all of us, that our senses are not windows, they are content moderators. They hide the terms of service. I looked at him. He was thin, sunken-eyed, expensively unhealthy. The kind of man who owns 3 sleep trackers and has not slept since 2017. I asked if PAN removed the moderation. He said PAN gave the mind access to the unfiltered feed. I told him that sounded like a very bad idea. He said that was because I had never raised venture capital. We went downstairs. The laboratory occupied what had once been a climate-controlled wine room. The previous owner had installed it to protect bottles of Burgundy from Miami humidity. Raymond had ripped out the racks and replaced them with surgical lights, imaging equipment, neural monitors, server cabinets, and one reclining medical chair that looked like a dentist chair after a nervous breakdown. On one wall was a framed copy of PAN's first term sheet. On another, a whiteboard covered in diagrams, cortex maps, equations, fragments of machine learning architecture, and the phrase latent God, written in red marker and circled 3 times. At the far end of the room, a young woman stood in a white hospital robe. Her name was Mary. She could not have been more than 19. Raymond had found her, he told me, through a charitable channel, which in founder language meant someone powerless enough to sign whatever was put in front of her. I asked if she understood the risks. Raymond made a tiny face, the way men do when you interrupt their TED talk with morality. He said she had consented. I told him that was not what I had asked. Mary looked at me then. She was beautiful in a plain, unprotected way that made the room feel worse. She said Dr. Raymond had helped her, that she trusted him. I hated him for that. Not enough to stop him, which is the kind of detail that keeps a man honest later. Raymond guided her into the chair. He began to speak about the old mystics and their visions of Pan. Not the goat man with pipes. Pan as totality. Everything alive and breeding and dying at once. The universe without PR. I said it sounded like he intended to show her that. He said no. PAN would. He touched a screen. An AI system woke across the monitors, displaying Mary's brain in soft blue layers. The model had been trained on neuroimaging, psychedelic experience reports, ancient religious texts, near-death transcripts, deep-sea organism behavior, satellite images of storms, and scraped forum posts from people who claim to have met God in clinical settings. I said aloud what I understood of it, that the model identified dormant neural structures, areas the brain had evolved to keep offline. Raymond asked me why a phone hides developer mode. I said, because most people will break something. He smiled. Then he placed a mask over Mary's mouth and nose. She looked at him. She asked if it would hurt. He said not physically. This was apparently good enough. The drug took hold quickly. Mary's eyelids fluttered, her muscles softened. The screens brightened with activity. Raymond moved with horrifying calm. A robotic surgical arm lowered from the ceiling, guided by the model. Its needle was finer than a hair. On the monitor, a path appeared through the soft tissue of Mary's brain. A glowing line, elegant and obscene. I said his name. He didn't look at me. I told him to say the word. He said it was too late. The arm entered. Mary's body stiffened. The monitors spiked. For one moment, the room smelled of hot grass after rain. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. The wine room, sealed beneath a rich man's house in Coconut Grove, filled with the smell of wet fields, crushed flowers, animal breath, old stone warmed by sun. Then every screen went black. Mary opened her eyes. I have spent years trying not to describe what was in them, because description implies a thing can be carried from one mind to another without changing shape. But I will say this: she was not looking at us. She was looking past us, through us, around us, behind the room, behind the house, behind the warm Miami night and the bay and the stars and the idea of stars. Wonder touched her face first, then recognition, then terror so complete it made her look new-born. She reached one hand into the empty air, as if something had bent down to greet her, and then she screamed. The scream did not sound human. That is a cliché, and like most clichés, it survives because sometimes it crawls out of the swamp and bites you. Mary screamed until blood came from her nose. She screamed until the lights burst. She screamed until Raymond, finally pale, shouted commands at the model, which offered 3 recommended interventions and 1 sponsored white paper. 3 days later, Mary was alive. That was the charitable way of putting it. She lay in a private clinic in Coral Gables, staring at the ceiling, moving her lips around words nobody could hear. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she wept. Once, when Raymond leaned over her, she smiled with an expression of such ancient pity that he left the room and was sick in the hallway. He told me she had seen it. I asked if he meant God. He said more. There are sentences that should end friendships. That one should have ended civilization. 9 months later, Mary gave birth to a daughter. Mary died 2 days after that. The child was named Helen. Raymond sent her away. That was the first time I behaved wisely, and all I did was nothing. For years afterward, I made a serious hobby of normal life. I became aggressively dull. I invested in municipal bonds. I developed opinions about dishwasher brands. I attended business lunches where men discussed parking minimums. I cultivated boredom like a medicinal herb. But at night, when the city outside my window pulsed with headlights and bad decisions, I found myself building a private archive. News clippings, police reports, medical oddities, forum posts, obituaries with peculiar gaps, influencer disappearances, deleted threads, screenshots of screenshots. I called the folder, and I am not proud of this, Devil Memoirs Final Thee. I should have stopped this for many of Hall. I did not stop there. Then came the story of Rachel Morales. Rachel was 14 when her family rented a cottage near a nature preserve outside Homestead, in the flat green world where Miami stops pretending to be a city and starts admitting it was built on top of something wet and patient. There she met a girl called Helen Vaughan. Helen was living with a farmer named Robles, placed there by an unnamed guardian who paid in advance and left instructions that she be permitted to do as she liked. Helen did as she liked. The other children adored her at first. She knew paths through the mangroves where the light turned green and gold. She knew which trees had fruit, which canals had alligators, which abandoned structures still held cool air in August. She told stories that made children feel chosen and adults feel sleepy. Rachel followed her everywhere. One afternoon, Rachel and Helen went into the preserve with a boy named Trevor Wells. Trevor came back alone, walking as if every bone had forgotten its job. He never spoke properly again. Rachel returned at sunset. She looked calm. Her mother asked what had happened. Rachel said, "We saw the other one." Then she went upstairs, washed her hands for 40 minutes, and refused to leave her room for the rest of the summer. A year later, Rachel was dead. Officially, fever. Unofficially, because the world is full of cowards with letterhead, complications. Trevor spent his life in facilities, smiling at corners. Helen Vaughan vanished. I filed it away. That is what cowards call action. Years passed. Miami grew taller and stupider. Every month brought some new tower, new fund, new app, new wellness club where members could pay $900 to be told breathing was good. The old grifts put on linen. The new grifts put on AI. I almost didn't recognize him. In college, he had been Charles Herbert, golden boy, family money, cheekbones, the sort of person professors described as promising because already wealthy sounded rude. When I saw him outside a coffee shop in Brickell, he was wearing a suit shiny with age and heat. His shoes had split at the sides. He had the collapsed look of a man who had not merely lost money, but been personally rejected by money. He said my name. I said his. He smiled. Several teeth had gone missing from the story. We sat beneath an umbrella while office workers moved around us in sunglasses, clutching cold brew and pretending the planet was not cooking them alive. I asked what had happened to him. He said, his wife. I asked if it was divorce. He said no. Divorce is a legal proceeding. This was more like archaeology. She had uncovered what he was and left it outside for birds. Her name, he told me, had been Helen. He had met her at an art opening in Wynwood, back when Wynwood still pretended to be about art and not photography backdrops for bachelorette parties. She had no family, no history, no obvious source of money. Within a month, he was in love. Within 3, married. Within a year, ruined. I asked how. He said she made people want things. I asked what things. He said their worst things. He told me about parties, private rooms, men who thought themselves civilized, women who thought themselves immune, artists producing drawings they later burned, investors writing checks and then weeping in parking garages, a judge who resigned, a wellness founder who cut out his own tongue rather than describe the retreat. He said she told people she could show them the real world, that they believed her. I asked about him. He said he saw enough. He grabbed my wrist then with startling force. He said the name she had used with him was Helen Vaughan, but he didn't think she had a name. Only people have names. He left before I could stop him. 2 weeks later, his body was found in a weekly motel off Biscayne Boulevard. The papers called it tragic. The papers are often technically correct, which is the least useful kind of correct. I began asking questions. Helen had moved through several lives. In Wynwood, she had been Mrs. Herbert. In Coral Gables, briefly, Elena V. In Miami Beach, she became Mrs. Beaumont. That was where the suicides began. Nobody called them that at first. The first was an accident. A managing partner at a major venture fund walked into the ocean at 3 a.m. wearing a dinner jacket. His final text to his associates read, "Saw product market fit." The second was a crypto exchange founder who locked himself inside a sauna at a private club and turned the heat up until the app stopped recording. The third was a donor who stepped from the balcony of his penthouse after leaving a voice memo for his family. The police never released it, but a detective told me he had said the same phrase 11 times. "I saw the goat behind the glass." Mrs. Beaumont's house was on one of the Venetian islands. White cube, black glass, palms and men with earpieces. Every Thursday night, the driveway filled with cars that looked like sharks. Founders arrived, fund managers, art dealers, influencers, politicians, a neuroscientist who had recently pivoted to longevity gummies, 3 men who described themselves as AI ethicists, which meant they had newsletters. Mrs. Beaumont hosted salons. That was the word used by people who wanted to make parties sound tax-deductible. The parties had rules. No phones, no assistants, no live streaming, no asking Mrs. Beaumont where she was from. A man named Austin, who knew everyone and liked almost no one, had been once. I asked him how it was. He said, "Extraordinary." I asked if he meant good or bad. He said yes. He drank half his martini. He said she served wine from clay jars, claimed it was 1,000 years old. Everyone laughed. Then nobody laughed. I asked what happened. He said there was music, not from speakers, at least he didn't think so, and the room changed. I asked how. He said I would think he was drugged. I told him I already thought everyone was drugged. He said the walls felt farther away, the ceiling higher. The people around him looked unfinished. I asked what he meant by unfinished. He said, as if their faces were polite suggestions. I asked about Mrs. Beaumont. He said she was the only thing in the room that looked complete. I showed him a photograph of Helen Vaughan, taken years earlier from Herbert's phone. It had been damaged, corrupted by water or heat. Her face was half blurred, but the eyes remained. Austin went white. He said, "That is her." I asked if he was sure. He said no. He said he was completely sure, which was worse. Villiers was a private investigator, though he preferred information consultant, because Miami is a city where even detectives need branding. He had once worked financial crimes, then corporate due diligence, then divorces, which he said were the same industry with better jewellery. 3 weeks after I hired him, he came to my apartment carrying a folder tied with red string. I asked why the string. He said, "Drama." Also, his printer was broken. He dropped it on my table. He said he had found her. He had traced her backward through shell companies, property leases, art purchases, medical payments, and one defunct non-profit called Open Veil Initiative, which had raised $18 million to democratize transcendence before quietly spending most of it on events. He opened the folder. Inside were witness statements, photographs, floor plans, a list of attendees at Beaumont's dinners, medical records from men who had survived them, drawings made by one of them afterward before he cut off his hands with gardening shears. The drawings were not good. I do not mean they lacked artistic merit. I mean they were hostile to being seen. Curves entered angles incorrectly. Bodies opened into landscapes. Faces repeated in places faces should not be. In one sketch, a woman stood beneath a palm tree, but the shadow cast by the palm was a horned thing with too many joints. At the bottom of the page, written again and again, "Pan is not a god. Pan is the door. Pan is not a god. Pan is the door." Villiers watched me close the folder. He said she had another party tomorrow. I said no. He said yes. I said we should call the police. He asked what I planned to say. That a woman on the Venetian islands was making rich men sad? I said it was Miami. That should be enough. He said it was Miami. That was zoning. He sat down. He said he had spoken to a man who survived one of her private sessions. The man said she didn't do anything. She talked. She looked at you. Sometimes she touched your forehead. Sometimes she showed you something on a screen. I asked what kind of screen. He said, Pan's old interface. The room seemed to tilt. I said Raymond's name. He said there was more. A silence. He said she had the model. I remembered the lab, the surgical arm, the blue glow of Mary's brain, the smell of wet fields. I said Pan had been shut down. He said companies shut down, code leaks, investors pivot, engineers keep backups because engineers are goblins. The model survived. Of course it had. That, more than anything, felt modern. We had built a machine to touch the forbidden structure beneath reality, watched it destroy a girl, and then, apparently, failed to delete the repository. Villiers leaned forward. He said, "Here is what I think. Raymond opened something in Mary. Helen was born from that opening. Now Helen is using Pan to open it in others. Not fully, just a crack. Enough for them to see what she is. Enough for them to understand what they are. Enough to make death feel like closing a browser tab." I told him that was insane. He said yes. I asked if he believed it. He said yes. I asked what we were supposed to do. Villiers removed something from his bag, a length of white rope. I said no. He said he wasn't proposing murder. I told him he had brought rope to a conversation. He said he was proposing a choice, that we would confront her, give her 15 minutes alone. Either she ended this herself, or we called the police and handed over everything. I said the police would not understand everything. He said no, but they understood dead billionaires. I wish I could describe some grand storm, some warning from the heavens. There was none. The weather was beautiful. Miami is cruel that way. The end of the world arrives under excellent patio lighting. Inside, the house was full of important people pretending not to be afraid of irrelevance. A founder explained to a senator that his AI platform would eliminate loneliness at scale. A venture partner told a woman in diamonds that regulation was just another customer discovery process. Someone laughed too loudly near a sculpture that looked like furniture having a panic attack. Then Mrs. Beaumont entered. Helen. She was perhaps 30, perhaps 20, perhaps older than the limestone under the bay. She wore a simple black dress, no jewellery, no visible makeup. She had the calm of a predator that does not need speed. When she saw me, she smiled. She said my name. She said I had known her mother. Villiers said her name. Helen Vaughan. She said, names again. Men do love labels. It makes the cage feel furnished. He told her we knew what she was. She said no. We knew paperwork. We knew stories. We knew frightened men, which was to say, we knew men. He told her she would come with us. She asked, would she? He showed her the folder. For the first time, something moved behind her face. Not fear. Recognition, perhaps, or boredom. She said we had been busy. He told her 15 minutes, alone. She knew why. He handed her the rope. The smile faded. Helen looked at the rope, then at me. She said I had been there. I said yes. She said, when he opened her. She asked, did she scream? I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to give her that mercy, or myself. But lies rot faster in Miami heat. I told her yes. Helen closed her eyes. For a second she looked almost human. Then she opened them again. She asked, would I like to know what she saw? No. That was the bravest thing I have ever done. Villiers led her upstairs. We waited below in a room with white sofas and a painting that was probably worth more than a school. The party had thinned. Austin stood by the window, shaking. At minute 12, the house began to smell of wet grass. At minute 13, every phone in the room lit up, though none had been brought inside. At minute 14, the bay outside went still. At minute 15, we went upstairs. Helen hung from the central beam of her bedroom. That is the simple version. The full version is not simple. Her body changed while we watched. It changed the way reflections change when water is disturbed. Woman to man, man to animal, animal to something boneless and vast. Skin darkened, paled, split, smoothed. Limbs shortened, lengthened, multiplied in suggestion if not in fact. Her face became Herbert's for one sickening moment, then Mary's, then Raymond's, then no face at all. Austin fainted. Villiers crossed himself, which surprised me, as he had once described religion as customer support for mortality. I stood there until it was done. When it was done, what remained on the rope was small and black and dry. The medical examiner called it advanced decomposition, despite the fact that she had been alive 20 minutes earlier. The police called it suicide. The papers called it a tragedy. The investors called it a difficult week for Miami's emerging consciousness tech ecosystem. Raymond's letter arrived 3 days later. He was in a hospice in Naples, dying of something expensive. He wrote, "I opened a door in her. I thought knowledge would enter. That was my vanity. Something else came through. The machine did not understand what it found. Neither did I. That was the danger. Not malice, not intelligence, pattern without wisdom, power without reverence, a mirror angled toward a place no human mind should see." Mary saw Pan. Helen was what saw us back. "I am sorry. This is inadequate. But then, so is language." Burn everything. We did not burn everything. That is the worst part. Not because we refused, because we couldn't. The servers were gone. The company had folded. The assets had been sold, copied, forked, archived, acquired. Pan's model had passed through cloud buckets, contractor laptops, investor demos, university labs, and at least one wellness app that now offers personalized ore journeys for $14.99 a month. Villiers says most copies are probably broken. Probably. Austin moved to Vermont. Herbert is dead. Raymond is dead. Helen is dead, if dead is the word. As for me, I live in Miami still. I keep my blinds closed at night. I avoid launch parties. I do not attend salons. When a founder tells me he is building tools to expand human consciousness, I leave before the past appetizers. And sometimes, when the air is very hot and the storm clouds gather over the bay, the city smells suddenly of wet fields and crushed flowers. Then the glass towers darken, the palms go still, and from somewhere behind the bright, stupid interface of the world, something ancient leans close to look through. Production notes.